I found the syringe in my mother's teacup. For context, my mother, let's call her Patricia, has always been what you might call intensely involved in my life. I'm an only child, and after my father passed away when I was 12, it became just the two of us against the world. She was a warrior, a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse to put me through school, who stayed up all night when I was sick, who somehow managed to be at every parent-teacher conference and every school play despite working 80-hour weeks. I loved her desperately, and for most of my life, I thought that love was returned in the purest way possible. But here's the thing about love that nobody tells you. It can curdle. It can sit out too long in the sun of expectation and need, and eventually, it turns into something that looks like love, smells like love, but will poison you if you consume it. When I met David, I thought I had found the missing piece of my life. He was steady where I was anxious, calm where I was reactive, practical where I was emotional. He was a high school history teacher with kind eyes and a patient way of explaining things that made even the most complicated topics feel simple. We met at a coffee shop when he accidentally spilled his drink on my laptop, and instead of getting defensive, he simply sat down, pulled out his own laptop, and spent the next 3 hours helping me recover my files. By the time we were done, I had his phone number and the distinct feeling that my life was about to change. My mother was polite about him at first. That should have been my first warning. Patricia was never just polite about anything. She had opinions, strong ones, and she expressed them with the same directness she'd used to convince doctors to follow her recommendations in the ICU. But with David, she was carefully, meticulously polite. She complimented his manners, his job, his clean fingernails. She asked him questions about his family, his upbringing, his plans for the future. She smiled the entire time, and I was so relieved that she approved that I missed the calculation behind every question. We got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. My mother cried during the vows, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she'd embroidered herself. She gave a toast about how proud she was of the woman I'd become, how happy she was that I'd found someone who would take care of me the way she always had. Everyone at the wedding commented on how sweet she was, how devoted, how lucky I was to have such a supportive mother. I agreed with them. I was lucky. I was so incredibly lucky. The first year of marriage was blissful. We bought a small house with a garden that David promptly filled with tomato plants and marigolds. My mother visited every Sunday for dinner, always bringing a casserole or pie, always staying just long enough to help with the dishes before kissing us both on the cheek and heading home. She and David developed their own rhythm, their own jokes, their own way of communicating that made me feel like I had somehow expanded my family rather than just adding to it. Then I got pregnant and everything shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of change you don't notice because you're too busy being excited about the future. My mother was thrilled about becoming a grandmother. She immediately started knitting booties and blankets, researching the best pediatricians in the area, offering to convert her spare bedroom into a nursery so she could babysit whenever we needed. I thought it was sweet. I thought it was exactly what any new mother would want from her own mother. But the comments started creeping in. Oh, you're going to do that with the nursery? Well, I suppose it's your choice, but I always read that pastel colors are better for brain development. You're considering cloth diapers? That's very ambitious of you. I'm sure it'll work out wonderfully if you have the time for it. Breastfeeding is wonderful, of course, but don't be disappointed if it doesn't work out. Some women just can't do it, and there's no shame in that. Every comment was wrapped in a layer of plausible deniability. If I pushed back, she would look wounded and insist that she was just trying to help, that she only wanted what was best for me and the baby, that I was being overly sensitive because of the hormones. David noticed it before I did. He would squeeze my hand under the table when she made these comments, a silent signal that he was on my side, that he saw what was happening. But I was still in denial. This was my mother. She loved me. She would never deliberately undermine me. Our daughter, whom we named Violet, was born on a Tuesday in June, and she was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that made her look like a tiny mad scientist, and lungs that could shatter glass. My mother was in the delivery room, having insisted that she needed to be there to support me, and she cried when Violet was placed on my chest. Real tears, genuine emotion. I remember thinking that everything was going to be okay, that whatever tension had existed during the pregnancy would melt away now that the baby was here. I was wrong. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, and my mother was there for every single one of them. She showed up at our house at all hours, letting herself in with the key we'd given her for emergencies, insisting that she just wanted to help, that I needed rest, that she could handle the baby while I slept. At first, I was grateful. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, still recovering from a difficult delivery. Having someone else take the night shift occasionally felt like a lifeline. But then I started noticing things. The way she would whisk Violet out of my arms the moment she started fussing, claiming that I was too tense, that the baby could sense my anxiety. The way she would question every decision I made, from the brand of formula I used, the way I burped her, to the clothes I dressed her in. The way she referred to herself as Mommy when talking to Violet, then correct herself with a little laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. She's confused. My mother said once when I pointed it out, all babies go through a phase where they call everyone Mommy. It doesn't mean anything. But Violet wasn't confused. Violet was 5 months old and already reaching for her grandmother with more enthusiasm than she reached for me. And my mother was there, always there, scooping her up, soothing her, being the one who could always make her stop crying. I was the one who had carried her for 9 months, who had pushed her into the world, who woke up every 2 hours to feed her, and yet somehow my mother had become the expert, the authority, the one who knew best. David started putting his foot down. He told my mother that she needed to back off, that we were Violet's parents, that we needed space to figure things out on our own. My mother listened with a patient expression, nodding along, agreeing with everything he said. And then she showed up the next day with casserole and a new toy for Violet and acted like nothing had happened. She's just excited about being a grandmother, I told David, still making excuses. She doesn't have anyone else. You know how she is. I know exactly how she is, David said, and there was something in his voice that made me look up from the burp cloth I was folding. She's treating Violet like her do-over baby, like you're just the incubator and she's the real mother. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you held Violet without your mother hovering over you, waiting to take her back? When was the last time you made a decision about her care that your mother didn't question or override? I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right, and I knew he was right, and admitting it meant admitting that something was deeply wrong with the person I loved most in the world. The first incident happened when Violet was 8 months old. My mother had offered to babysit while we went to a movie, our first date night since the baby was born. We were gone for 3 hours, and when we came back, Violet was asleep in the pack-and-play, and my mother was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, looking perfectly content. She was an angel, my mother said. Didn't fuss at all. I gave her a little rice cereal to help her sleep, and she went right down. I froze. Violet was exclusively breastfed. We hadn't introduced solids yet. The pediatrician had specifically said to wait until 9 months because of some digestive issues Violet had been having. You gave her cereal? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Just a tiny bit. It helped her settle. You really should start introducing solids. You know, the doctor doesn't know everything. David stepped forward, his jaw tight. Patricia, we specifically asked you not to give her anything but breast milk. The doctor said, what he had to say to avoid liability. My mother waved her hand dismissively. I raised you, didn't I? You turned out fine. A little cereal isn't going to hurt her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my mother by the shoulders and shake her until she understood that this was my child, my decision, my life. But instead, I walked over to Pack and Play, picked up my sleeping daughter, and carried her to the nursery without saying another word. David showed my mother to the door, and I could hear their murmured voices, his calm and controlled, hers defensive and dismissive. She doesn't get it, David said when he came to bed that night. She genuinely doesn't understand why you're upset. She understands, I said, staring at the ceiling. She just doesn't care. That was the beginning of the war. A quiet war at first, fought in passive-aggressive comments and carefully orchestrated visits. My mother would show up unannounced with gifts for Violet. Always something we'd said we didn't want. Noisy toys when we'd asked for quiet ones. Sugary snacks when we'd said no sugar. Clothes in sizes that wouldn't fit for months. She would offer to babysit, then forget our instructions about nap times and feeding schedules. She would post pictures of Violet on social media before we had a chance to share them ourselves, claiming she was just so excited she couldn't help it. David wanted to cut her off completely. He wanted to change the locks, block her number, pretend she didn't exist. But I couldn't do that. She was my mother. She had sacrificed everything for me. She had loved me unconditionally for 30 years. How could I throw that away over disagreements about parenting? She needs help, I told David. She needs therapy. Maybe she's lonely since Dad died. She doesn't have anyone else. She has you, David said, but she doesn't want you. She wants another version of you, one that she can control. I didn't listen. I kept letting her come over, kept letting her hold Violet, kept hoping that somehow, magically, things would get better. And for a while they did. My mother seemed to realize that she'd pushed too far, and she pulled back. She stopped showing up unannounced. She started asking before making decisions. She even apologized, sort of saying that she was just so excited about being a grandmother that she forgot her place. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. So when Violet's first birthday approached and my mother offered to host a party at her house, I agreed. It would be good for her, I thought. It would give her something to focus on, something to pour her energy into that wasn't about control. David was skeptical, but he went along with it because he knew how much it meant to me. The party was lovely. My mother had decorated the house with streamers and balloons, baked a beautiful cake from scratch, prepared a spread of food that could have fed an army. Violet, dressed in a frilly pink dress that my mother had bought against my wishes, sat in her high chair and smashed her hands into a small cupcake while everyone took pictures and laughed. For a few hours, we were a normal family, a happy family, the kind of family I'd always wanted. Then Violet got sick. It started with a rash on her cheeks, bright red and spreading fast. Then her eyes started swelling, her lips puffing up like she'd been stung by bees. She started wheezing, a terrible whistling sound that made my blood run cold. I grabbed her from the high chair, screaming for someone to call 911, while David rushed to get the epinephrine injector that we now carried everywhere after Violet's recent allergy diagnosis. The doctors had confirmed it 3 months earlier. Violet was severely allergic to strawberries, tree nuts, and dairy. We'd had to change everything. Our grocery shopping, our eating habits, the way we prepared food in our kitchen. It had been difficult, but it was worth it to keep our daughter safe. And my mother had been told, multiple times, in detail. She'd nodded along, asked questions, even offered to learn how to use the epinephrine injector in case of emergency. But at the party, while I was holding my daughter and waiting for the ambulance, I saw the cake, the beautiful cake that my mother had baked from scratch. It was covered in strawberries. Sliced strawberries arranged like flowers, with a border of chopped nuts around the edge. And Violet had eaten a whole cupcake. Where did you get the cake? I asked my mother, my voice shaking with rage and fear. I made it, she said, and her expression was, I don't know how to describe it. Triumphant? Vindicated? From scratch. An old family recipe. There are strawberries on it. I know. She smiled. They're just for decoration. The cake itself doesn't have any strawberries in it. And the nuts, chopped almonds, toasted, they add such a nice texture. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at her while the paramedics rushed into the house and took my daughter from my arms, while David grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the ambulance, while the rest of the family stood around in shocked silence. My mother watched us go, and she was still smiling. Violet spent 2 nights in the hospital. She was okay. The epinephrine had worked. The paramedics had been fast. The doctors had been able to stabilize her before any permanent damage was done. But she was okay despite my mother, not because of her. She was okay because we had been prepared, because we had acted quickly, because we had the tools and the knowledge to save her. If any of those things had been missing, if we hadn't had the epinephrine injector, if the paramedics had been delayed, if Violet's reaction had been even more severe, I don't want to think about what might have happened. When we finally came home, there was a message from my mother on the answer machine. She sounded cheerful, unbothered, like nothing had happened. Just checking in, she said. Let me know when you're ready for visitors. I have some more pictures from the party that I want to show you. David wanted to call the police. He wanted to have her arrested for attempted murder, or at least for child endangerment. But I talked him down. She was my mother. She had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But surely she hadn't meant to hurt Violet. Surely she just didn't understand how serious allergies could be. Surely, if we explained it to her again, more firmly this time, she would finally get it. I was wrong. We went to her house the next day, leaving Violet with David's sister, who had been nothing but supportive throughout the whole ordeal. My mother greeted us at the door with a smile and a plate of cookies, as if we were coming for a social call rather than a confrontation. We need to talk about what happened at the party, I said, not sitting down, not accepting the cookies. My mother's smile flickered for just a moment. Of course, sweetheart. I know you were upset. But Violet is fine, isn't she? The doctor said she's perfectly fine. She nearly died, Mom. She did not nearly die. That's such an exaggeration. Kids have allergic reactions all the time. It's no big deal. David stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. It is a big deal. The doctor said if we'd been even 5 minutes later getting her to the hospital, she could have gone into anaphylactic shock. She could have stopped breathing. She could have died. My mother looked at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity? Contempt? You're both being dramatic. I raised you, and I never worry about allergies. You ate everything, and you turned out fine. This whole generation of parents, with their organicness and non-GMO, that had allergies to everything. It's all in your heads. You're projecting your anxiety onto the children. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. The doctors did tests. They confirmed the allergies. This isn't in our heads. Tests can be wrong. She waved her hand dismissively. They're wrong all the time. I read an article about it. Half of all allergy diagnoses are false. I looked at David. He looked at me, and in that moment, something shifted between us. We both realized at the same time that we were never going to convince her, that she didn't want to be convinced, that her belief in her own rightness was more important to her than our daughter's life. We're leaving, David said, taking my hand. And until you can acknowledge that what you did was wrong, we don't want you anywhere near our daughter. My mother laughed. Actually laughed. You can't keep me from my granddaughter. I have rights. I'm her grandmother. You have no rights, David said quietly. None at all. And if you try to come near her again, we'll get a restraining order. We walked out her house, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had looked back, I might have seen my mother's face, and I don't know what I would have done if I'd seen what I suspected was there. Not regret, not sadness, something else entirely. For 2 months, we had peace. My mother didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at our door. We changed the locks anyway, just in case. We blocked her number. We told the daycare not to let her anywhere near Violet. We thought naively that it was over, that she had finally understood the boundaries and was respecting them. Then the letter arrived. It was addressed to me in my mother's familiar handwriting, and it was thick enough to suggest multiple pages. I opened it with shaking hands, expecting an apology, expecting some acknowledgement of what she'd done wrong. Instead, I found a manifesto, 12 pages, single-spaced, detailing everything I had ever done wrong in my life. Every mistake I had made as a child, every decision she disagreed with as an adult, every way I had failed her as a daughter. She wrote about how I had chosen David over her, how I had let him turn me against her, how I was a terrible mother who was going to ruin Violet's life with my overprotectiveness and my anxiety and my refusal to listen to wisdom and experience. She wrote about how she had sacrificed everything for me, how she had given up her own happiness to raise me, how I was repaying her by stealing her granddaughter away. She wrote about how I was mentally ill, how I needed help, how she was the only one who truly loved me, and that was why she had to be cruel, to be kind. And at the very end, in the last paragraph, she wrote, I will not give up on you. I will not give up on Violet. You are my daughter, and she is my granddaughter, and I will fight for you both until my last breath. If that means I have to do things you don't like, things that seem cruel, then so be it. I love you too much to let you destroy yourself. I love Violet too much to let you destroy her. You'll thank me someday. When you're older and wiser, you'll understand that everything I've done, everything I will do, is because I love you. I read the letter 3 times, and with each reading, the horror grew. This was the letter of a loving mother who had made mistakes. This was the letter of someone who genuinely believed she was right, who saw herself as a hero of a story where I was a villain, who was willing to do anything, to prove her point. I showed it to David. He read it silently, his face growing paler with each page. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Genuine fear. We need to call the police, he said. For what? She didn't threaten us. She just wrote a letter. She's unstable. She believes she's justified in doing anything to save Violet. That's a threat. That's a threat wrapped in love and tied with a bow. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because he was right. I knew he was right. The woman who had raised me, who had loved me, who had sacrificed for me, that woman was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw my daughter not as a separate person with her own needs and her own life, but as a prize to be won, a battleground to be fought over. We went to the police that afternoon. We showed them the letter, explained the history, told them about the birthday party and the hospital stay. The officer who took our statement was sympathetic but practical, without a direct threat, without any recent incidents. There wasn't much they could do. They suggested we keep the letter, keep any future communications, and call them immediately if she showed up at our house or tried to contact Violet. We'll make a note in our system, the officer said. If there are any incidents, we'll have this on record. But for now, the best thing you can do is stay vigilant and don't engage with her. We went home, and we tried to go back to our lives. We took Violet to the park, to the library, to the children's museum. We had dinner with David's sister and her family. We laughed and played and pretended that everything was normal. But at night, when Violet was asleep and the house was quiet, we would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and wonder what my mother was planning. 3 weeks later, I found the syringe in my mother's teacup. Let me back up. My mother had a teacup. It was part of a set that had belonged to her mother, delicate bone china with hand-painted roses on the side. She only used it on special occasions, and she kept in a glass cabinet in her living room, safe from the wear and tear of everyday use. It was her most treasured possession, the only thing she had left from her own mother, who had died when my mother was young. After we cut contact, I couldn't stop thinking about that teacup, about all the things my mother had that I would never see again, about all the memories that were now tainted by what had happened. And one night, when I couldn't sleep, I found myself driving to her house. I don't know what I was planning to do. Talk to her? Scream at her? Beg her to be the mother I remembered? I parked down the street and sat in my car, staring at the house where I'd grown up, and I cried. That's when I saw the light go on in the kitchen. It was after midnight, but my mother was awake. I watched through the window as she moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, pulling things out. She was wearing her bathrobe, her hair disheveled, and she moved with a purpose that made my skin crawl. I couldn't see what she was doing, but I could see her hands, busy and deliberate, working on something at the counter. I should have left. I should have started the car and driven away and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I was frozen, watching, waiting for something to happen. After about 20 minutes, she turned off the kitchen light and disappeared into the hallway. I waited another 10 minutes, then got out of the car. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was operating on instinct, on some deep primal need to understand what was happening. I went around to the back of the house, to the door that led into the kitchen. It was unlocked. It was always unlocked, a habit from my childhood that my mother had never broken. I slipped inside, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she would hear it. The kitchen was dark, but enough light filtered in from the street to see by. And there, on the counter, was the teacup, my mother's precious teacup, the one she never used, the one she kept in the glass cabinet. It was sitting on the counter, and next to it was a syringe, a small syringe, the kind used for insulin or other medications. It was empty, but there were droplets of something on the counter, something clear and viscous. I picked up the syringe. I picked up the teacup. And I knew with absolute certainty that my mother had been preparing something that involved this teacup, this syringe, this unknown substance, something that she was planning to give to someone. And there was only one person she would go to such lengths for. I took them. I don't know why. I took the syringe and the teacup, wrapped them in a paper towel from the counter, and walked out of the house. I drove home on autopilot, my mind blank with shock. When I got there, I put the items in a plastic bag and hid them in the back of my closet, behind some old shoes I never wore. Then I went to bed and lay awake until dawn. I didn't tell David. I couldn't. Telling him would mean admitting that my mother was capable of something truly terrible, something beyond the birthday party and the letter. It would mean admitting that the danger wasn't just hypothetical, wasn't just in our heads. It would mean accepting that the woman who raised me might be trying to poison my daughter, but the teacup haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it sitting on that counter, next to that syringe. Every time I held Violet, I wondered if this was the last time, if my mother was planning something that would take her away from me forever. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, convinced that something had happened, that I had failed to protect her. David noticed. Of course he noticed. He started asking questions, gently at first, then more insistently. What was wrong? Why was I so jumpy? Why couldn't I sleep? I made excuses, work stress, hormonal changes, worry about Violet's development. He pretended to believe me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Then my mother called. It was the middle of the day, and I was home alone with Violet. The phone rang, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a desperate hope that she was calling to apologize. Maybe just the ingrained habit of a lifetime. "Hello, sweetheart." Her voice was warm, familiar, the voice of the mother I remembered. "I'm so glad you answered. I've been so worried about you." "What do you want?" "I want to see my granddaughter. I want to make things right. I know I made mistakes. I know I pushed too hard. But I love you both so much, and I can't bear the thought of never seeing Violet again." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "You tried to kill her." "What? No. No. Sweetheart, that's not true. I would never." "You put strawberries in the cake. You put nuts in the frosting. You knew she was allergic. You knew." There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder. "She's not really allergic. The doctors are wrong. I was trying to prove that to you. If she'd eaten the cake and been fine, you would have seen that all your worrying was for nothing. She ended up in a hospital. Because you panicked. Because you gave her that shot. If you'd just waited, if you'd let her body process it naturally, she would have been fine. You're the one who made her sick. You and your anxiety and your overprotective nonsense." I couldn't breathe. I literally could not draw air into my lungs. This woman, this stranger wearing my mother's face, genuinely believed what she was saying. There was no reasoning with her. There was no reaching her. She was lost to me forever. "I have to go," I whispered. Wait, sweetheart. I have something for you. Something that will help. Can I come over? Just for a few minutes? I'll bring tea. We'll talk. We'll work this out." Tea. The teacup. The syringe. "No," I said, and hung up. I sat on the floor of my living room, shaking uncontrollably, while Violet played with her blocks a few feet away. She looked up at me and smiled, that gummy two-toothed smile that usually made my heart melt, and I burst into tears. She crawled over to me, patted my leg with her chubby little hand, and I picked her up and held her so tight that she started to squirm. That night, I told David everything. He listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each word. When I finished, when I showed him the syringe and the teacup still hidden in my closet, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just held me while I cried. "We're calling the police in the morning," he finally said. "And we're getting that restraining order. And we're never, ever letting her near Violet again." "What if they can't do anything? What if there's no proof?" "There's proof." He gestured at the plastic bag. "There's her fingerprints on that syringe. There's her DNA on that teacup. And there's your testimony. It's enough." It wasn't enough. The police were sympathetic. But without evidence that the syringe had contained something dangerous, without proof that my mother had intended to use on Violet, there wasn't much they could do. They took the items for testing, but the results came back clean. The syringe had contained only water, and the teacup showed no traces of any harmful substance. My mother, when questioned, claimed that she used a syringe to water her plants and had no idea how it ended up in the kitchen. As for the teacup, she said she'd been cleaning it, preparing to give it to me as a gift, a peace offering. She's lying. I told the officer. She's lying, and you know it. We know, he said, and there was genuine sympathy in his eyes. But we can't act on what we know. We have to act on what we can prove. And right now, we can't prove anything. The restraining order was easier with the history of the birthday party, the letter, and now this incident. We had enough to convince a judge that my mother posed a credible threat to our family. The order was granted for 2 years, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of our home, our workplace, or our daughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My mother called every relative she had, spinning a story about how I had fabricated evidence, how I had broken into her house and stolen her belongings, how I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. Half of my extended family believed her. The other half didn't know what to believe. We were bombarded with calls, texts, social media messages, some supportive, some accusatory, all exhausting. David's family, thankfully, rallied around us. His parents flew in from out of state to help with Violet, to give us time to process and grieve. His sister came over every day with meals and distractions and a willingness to listen without judgment. We weren't alone, and that made all the difference. But the hardest part was Violet. She was too young to understand what was happening, but she could feel the tension in the house, the weight of our anxiety. She started having nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. She became clingy, refusing to let me out of her sight, crying whenever I tried to hand her to someone else. The pediatrician said it was normal, that children absorb their parents' emotions, that she would be fine with time and consistency and love. But every scream, every tear felt like a wound. 3 months passed. 3 months of therapy for me, of support groups for David, of careful, deliberate normalcy for Violet. We started to heal. We started to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then the package arrived. It was a dress of Violet in my mother's handwriting, and it was small enough to fit through the mail slot. I saw it sitting on the floor when I came downstairs one morning, and my heart stopped. The restraining order prohibited contact, but it didn't prohibit mail. I had forgotten to include that provision. A stupid, careless mistake. I didn't open it. I called our lawyer, who called the police, who came and took the package away for testing. They opened in a controlled environment, using all the proper protocols. And inside, they found a single item, the teacup, my mother's precious teacup, the one I had taken from her house months ago. She had gotten it back somehow. I later learned that the police had returned it after the testing came back clean, and now she was sending it to my daughter. There was no note, no explanation, just a teacup, wrapped in tissue paper and packed in a box. The testing this time was more thorough. They swabbed every surface, analyzed every particle, ran every test available. And this time they found something, a residue of a substance that shouldn't have been there, a substance that, if ingested, could cause severe neurological damage in a small child, a substance that my mother as a nurse had access to, a substance that left no trace in the water, that would have been undetectable in the tea, that would have slowly, quietly destroyed my daughter's brain. The police arrested her that afternoon. They found more of the substance in her house, hidden in a cabinet in her bathroom. They found journals detailing her plans, her justifications, her conviction that she was saving Violet from my poisonous influence. They found evidence that she had been researching this for months, that she had tested it on herself to make sure it wouldn't kill, that she had been waiting for the right moment to administer it. At the trial, she showed no remorse. She testified that she loved Violet more than anything, that she was trying to protect her from me, that everything she did was out of love. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before finding her guilty of attempted murder. The judge, when pronouncing the sentence, called her actions the most profound betrayal of trust one have ever witnessed. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 10. Violet will be 12 years old by then, old enough to understand, old enough to ask questions, old enough to decide for herself whether she wants to know the grandmother who tried to poison her. We moved after the trial. A new house in a new city, far from the memories and the relatives who still believe my mother's lies. David found a new job. I started writing, finally putting down on paper all the things I'd been carrying for years. Violet started preschool, made friends, learned to read and write and ride a bike. She rarely asks about my mother anymore, and when she does, we tell her the truth in terms she can understand. Grandma was very sick, and she had to go away to get better, and she can't be around us until she's well. It's a gentle lie, kindred in the reality. But someday, Violet will be old enough to know the whole truth. And on that day, I'll sit her down and tell her everything. About the grandmother who loved her too much. About the teacup and the syringe and the package in the mail. About the trial and the sentence and the years of fear. About how we survived, how we healed, how we learned to trust again. And I'll tell her that love, real love, doesn't poison. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't destroy. Real love protects and nurtures and sets free. Real love lets go when letting go is what's best. Real love puts the beloved first, always, no matter the cost. My mother never understood that. She loved me, I believe that. She loved Violet, I believe that too. But her love was a cage, a trap, a weapon. It was love that consumed instead of nourished. Love that destroyed instead of built. Love that poisoned in every sense of the word. I found the syringe in my mother's teacup. But what I really found in that moment was the truth about the woman who raised me. And the truth, as terrible as it was, set me free.